Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another DBD Coaches Call. Today we're going to be going over a lot of the principles of deliberate practice and lifter psychology. There's a lot to unpack here. It's a topic that I'm really passionate about. I'm going to be going through and asking each of the coaches a question. None of them have had these questions beforehand, so they're just going to kind of be dropped on them. Because a big part of this is that I want organic responses out of all of us. Each of us are also lifters. We also go through a lot of the same things, and so I feel that a lot of our own organic responses are gonna be best for this. So some of the biggest things that I wanted to get into are particularly lifter psychology in off season, and then how that affects competition prep, or even competition day. So one of the points that I have written down is that off season is where those mental habits are formed that carry us into prep and then into meet day. Another one is that the athlete mindset during this period shapes how effectively our training transfers under pressure. So if we are keeping those high standards within training, how do those standards then reflect whenever we get into competition? And then what locked in actually looks like. So I wanted to open this first one up to everyone. I know this is quite ambiguous, so unmute yourselves and chip in whenever. But to each of you as individuals, what is one perhaps hot take that you have surrounding what locked in actually looks like?
I would say the hot take is that being actually locked in is the least Instagrammable thing, and it's the most Instagrammed thing right now. So I was trying to go hot take as like verging on something that people would actually be annoyed by, but like I don't think if you're truly locked in, you would be able to like demonstrate and advocate it for a way that actually looks interesting to people, because locked in is really simplistic and boring by the nature of the sport and the habits that you have to construct. And so being locked in and being like, okay, well, my nutrition's on point, so I'm eating really boring things and it's pretty routine with that. And my schedule's, so I'm going for a walk again that I do every day. Here's 10,000 steps. Come watch that with me. Like the baseline things, I think, are just probably really boring. And that's what being locked in means, is you're doing really difficult things in terms of the fact that they are not interesting, as opposed to they're highly challenging. I think they're challenging for mentality more than they are for like the action of themselves.
I think that's huge. There's a lot of monotony to the sport. Kim, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think most people that say they're locked in aren't actually locked in, because to be locked in, you don't need to tell anyone that you are locked in. You just do it.
That's so fact. I feel like I see everyone posting the like graph that's like, we're so back, it's so over, we're locked in, like this up and down graph. I see this posted all of the time, and people being like, we're so back. Oh, that could tangent really easily, but I genuinely feel that for the vast majority of people, Kim, you've kind of hit it in the head. Most of the time, you're actually, if you feel the need to proclaim it from the rooftops, you're probably not that locked in. It's something that is definitely like an observable behavior, and people will automatically notice of you because it's what is required, and you'll carry yourself differently as a result of it. I wanted to ask Alice a specific question surrounding this. When you would say that a lifter's locked in during that off season, what are some like observable behaviors that you're looking for?
Not skipping out on like any accessories or anything like that. Something that could easily be, I mean, sometimes I'm guilty of it. Like if I have to get home for a call or something, I'm like, oh, I don't have time to do this last accessory. But like in an off season, sort of still seeing the importance of the things that sometimes people might put lower down on their rankings. Sort of seeing the importance to every single step, even if it is lower down on their rankings.
I almost want to, Adam, were you going to say something?
I was going to say prep and competition like highlights the most difficult things that a lifter's facing, or highlights areas of improvement. And I think one of the things I'm looking for in an athlete is them willingly to attach themselves to that challenge and tackle it head on, rather than just doing the things they enjoy. Just like transition it over into the things that you might not necessarily enjoy, but you know will benefit that that challenge that you've had in the prep and the competition day?
Yeah, Callum.
I was writing it down of being like, because you said like observable behaviors. I was thinking like there's actually not that much that's observable when people are locked in. But one of the things that I want you to push back if you disagree is lower amounts of emotional response. So like, we talk about like thirds that of good, bad, neutral. Most of the neutral element I think exists in the off-season bit. Like, so the good and bad is more on the periphery of that. When you're getting close to competition, that's when you're really aware of what is good and bad, because there's an expectation for it, there's a high standard for it. But I think that mid ground of boring or just neutral training is in the off season. And so the like not rash decisions, not getting quickly caught up on things, not being like that was a terrible session, like it's just another session. That's what the locked in off season bit is to me. And so I think observably being like, I want to move the needle, I'm doing my 1%, I'm doing the work, I work hard, but it's less emotional in individual sessions. I might be wrong, but it's just the only thing I could think of observably.
I'm trying to think about that. I know that in a previous DBD coaches call, one of the things that we talked about was like a lifter's emotional bandwidth, right? So we have like very much our hype lifters and our focus lifters, and they seem to be in like two opposite ends of the same spectrum of argument, basically, where what gives you your most productive training, right? Is it those highly emotional sessions, or is it those more focused sessions? And it kind of raises that interesting point of like, is this all just dependent on proximity to competition? And then we start to get that nuance. Lucy, in your experience with competition, you've come in time and time again with internationals. Have you seen that sort of trend where, and you've spoken yourself about like post-comp blues, have you found that you've come from that into more focused, into more emotional as you've gotten into competition? Do you find yourself just being more of a focus lifter? What way does that work with you?
I think so for like my current experience, I'm heavily dependent on a competition as to how I actually feel about my training. I haven't even officially got a competition lined up right now, but I know that I could potentially within the next 4 months be competing. And within the last probably 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a significant change in the way that I'm training. And Callum's smiling because he's like, thank God, finally, she's woken up. Because like since British Naps was March, I've been through that post comp blues phase. I've been in the neutral training where I have no emotion kind of towards it, because like we said, we're just going through the motions. I think even when you're in the off season, obviously time dependent, there isn't really an excuse not to do your accessories. I think for me, the way that I see it with my clients dropping out on like that neutral phase is just a significant lack of comms or posting for video analysis, those kind of like normal day-to-day basics. That's what tends to drop off. But for me, I'm very emotionally dependent on my comps. So I know that there is potential for a comp coming up. I am training differently. I do now feel more emotional about my training, also because I've kind of just come out of the like positive end of almost rehabbing. So that's like fed into it even more. But yeah, I wish I wasn't, because I think you could be way more productive if you have a different reason to train instead of it just always being competition dependent. Because if you can have an athlete, say, train for a solid year and have really good outputs and have no competition to interrupt that, you'd get a lot more, I think, positive data and positive strength out of that lifter. So I wish I wasn't so competition dependent and I could keep that focus like all year round. But I just think it's a really unrealistic expectation to think of someone being locked in for 365 days of the year.
Can I just check? Because I might have credited something to the wrong thing then. And so this is coach to athlete. I'm just checking something. So your last 2 weeks have been like remarkably good, right? It was a massive step up. Are you attributing that to knowing that you might do a comp because we spoke about that? Because I attributed that to getting out the back of a rehab bit where you're able to put a belt on and you were seeing the results of a process.
So yes, I'm feeling positive because I'm no longer like injured or in pain or hating my sessions. But no, it's pretty much that I'm like, please tell me I haven't wasted the last few months doing weak work, doing poor sessions, giving a poor output when I could have an expectation to compete in the next like 3 months.
All right, never mind.
Sorry.
I
I had
actually want to
attributed-
give you.
Go
Oh,
on.
go ahead, Calm.
No, I was going to say I had attributed it to had seen the payoff of a specific process, so there was a time horizon, like something had to pay off over, and now you're at the other end of that point, being like, okay, like I did the work, oh good, I'm in a good place. I did not put it down to the fact that there was also another thing at a further distance. I thought it was specifically within this bubble, but I got that wrong. That's on me.
I actually want to ask Lucy another question. Because you've just spoken about obviously rehab, there's been a lot of changes to your training environment as of recently as well. Now, this is a question to you as a coach for your athletes who maybe experience similar or the same circumstances. When life gets really, really chaotic for them, how do you kind of renegotiate those training standards without lowering an athlete's expectations of perhaps themselves, of how their training should look or feel?
So I think for me, I'm a huge reinforcer of like everything's got a purpose, everything has a point. Even if you're rehabbing, even if you have to drop the weight way back, um, there is a way to work through it, and there is still positives that you can get from it. I had an athlete recently have a back problem just from twisting whilst he was loading the weight. After rehabbing with the physios, we continued to train, adapted accordingly. He's now back on full cycle and is already making PBs and progress, already lifting weights that he was previously. Just because you take that time and you make every kind of adaptation and effort into making positive outcomes. It's something that I've had to obviously find and demonstrate myself as well, going through my own kind of rehab. And it isn't easy, and it is so easy to fall into that trap of like, I'm not doing good work, I'm not lifting heavy weights, there's no point to this, there's no progress. But just by doing a body weight squat, just by doing a bench press, you are still making progress, you are still reinforcing that muscle memory and building your mental stamina and ability to push through those harder times as well. So I just make sure that I'm constantly reinforcing that the work is still being done, and the rehab exercises that are boring, they may be banded work, it's probably lots of ab strength, they're kind of hard tasks to make someone want to do every single day if that's required. But I just reinforce that there's always a point to it, and if you can keep your rehab exercises included within your training even post rehab, that's how you've built like a positive exercise and environment within the rehab, because they're still willing, and it just becomes part, a series of exercises, stretches, band work or abs that again just becomes part of that 1% that you make your bed in the morning and you do your rehab. It becomes like a non-negotiable. So although that takes time, it's something that like I'm constantly reinforcing that it is a positive behavior, and that it should be encouraged and rewarded as well. It's something that if that's all you did today, it's still worth a well done. I think he's paused, so I'm going to keep talking about it. Oh, no. No, just muted. Stretching's great. Ab exercises, plank, side plank.
Brandon, please unmute yourself. She can't keep winging it.
Okay, here we go. I think I'm back now. Thank you, Lucy. I did hear all of that somehow. I do actually want to turn this to Kim. Kim, going off of the back of what Lucy said, particularly with those who are going through rehab and have experienced injury, what way do you balance your communications with people so that you're allowing them a high degree of autonomy? Because realistically, you're not going to hold someone's hand through a rehab process, right? You have to give it to them and assume that they'll do it. But what way do you communicate with them to balance autonomy with those like non-negotiable standards that Lucy's talked about?
One thing that comes to mind first is that when someone's going through rehab, they experience some pain or discomfort. And I think most people expect to not experience some pain or discomfort when they're going through that rehab. Whereas like you have to start to reframe that to get them to understand that it's gonna hurt a little bit because you're forcing your body or your joint, whatever, to do what it doesn't want to do. So it's gonna send you those signals, but getting them to be aware of the day-to-day, how they feel, you know, while they're working or just while they're sitting there. And then how it feels long-term. You know, if we just take a Monday this week, okay, it feels like a 8 out of 10 pain, but next week when I'm doing it, it feels like a 5. So if we see that trickle down, you start to help them shift their mindset into something more positive versus a like, oh, this hurts, I don't want to do it anymore.
I think you've touched on a really, really important point, which is like the mental reframing of things. It's something that I've held like extended discussion with some of my athletes, and my coach Callum has had extended discussion with me surrounding that very same thing. It almost, I find, at least in my own experience, that it almost turns into a goal in and of itself, which is one of the first steps of deliberate practice. And this is one of the things that I wanted to really get into. We kind of say like it's X amount of hours. I think it's 10,000 hours that need to be spent until you get it, be it mastery or a high degree of proficiency with something. And so those 10,000 hours that go into that need to be done under the framework of deliberate practice, which has 5 different steps for our viewers. The first one is well-defined goals. The second one is focused attention. The third is immediate and informative feedback. You can see why we as the coaches chose this. 4 is get out of your comfort zone, which Kim has perfectly segued us into. And 5 is reflection and refinement. The coaching experience in general, to me, should be something that amplifies this. This is something that you otherwise could probably do by yourself. However, there are certain aspects of it that you would be nigh on powerless to do yourself. You wouldn't quite get that full measure of it. And so I want to turn each of these to each of our coaches. I wanted to turn it to Adam. Surrounding well-defined goals, what have you found to be a really, really effective goal-setting metric for your athletes?
I think one of the most important aspects is not just setting a goal, but a goal that is resonated with. Because I find that if you actually resonate with that goal, you're going to tend to steer towards that direction and work towards it. If it's a goal that you're not really resonating with, you kind of like shrug your shoulders and you do the work, but not to the capacity that's needed for said goal. So I think one of the first steps is actually thinking about the processes. What do I resonate with? A lot of, obviously, in powerlifting, who are being specific to the sport, we are ultimately going to be chasing numbers. But I want to reframe the athlete's mindset is, why is that number important to you? What does that number mean to you? What are the traits that are going to get you there? And that's the kind of process I would go through with my athletes, is establishing what are the traits that go into that goal. Because I think that's what builds a true athlete, rather than just chasing numbers and just go willy-nilly. So for me, it is about resonating with the goal and establishing what that goal means to you. So traits, why you aim for that number, what does that mean to you, for example?
Callum, go ahead.
I loved what Adam was saying, and it had me write something down, because you were saying about like we're obviously chasing numbers, and I was just thinking, I'm gonna pick on Alice. Why did you come into powerlifting? Short answer, sorry. What brought you to powerlifting?
Because I wanted to squat 100 kilos to depth.
But you didn't have to do powerlifting. You just wanted to squat 100 kilos. What made you do powerlifting?
Oh, well, I just wanted to get stronger.
Okay, cool. Brandon, why did you start powerlifting? Short.
I was gonna say short. Prove something to myself.
Okay, I won't do this for every single person, but actually realizing in the goal setting is they're so poorly defined because they're not ours. Like almost no one came into powerlifting because they said they had a metric. Like I think all of us came into powerlifting because we wanted a feeling. And so when we set goals, like every single person, we get an inquiry call and someone goes, I want to hit these numbers. And you go, you literally made that up. Like you made that up when you had goals before and you attributed a metric to those goals, and when you were saying like what the metric for goal setting, I think that's the issue, is that exactly what Adam was saying is like trying to find what they resonate with, but you're asking about the why. And like the core of people's metric with their goals typically is something about a feeling. Like when someone says, I want to lose weight, I want to be 10 kilos lighter, and go, no, you want to feel good in your body. The feeling, it's nothing to do with the metric. And so I think one of the things that athletes do, if anyone says like, I want to be the best in the world, I'm like, you want to feel like you have achieved something that's impossible to achieve. Like it's nothing to do with the metric. And I think that plays into what Adam was saying. It's just, yeah, I think there is almost no one I've ever met that got into the sport off of a metric.
I think also as time goes by with an athlete, so obviously you have your original goal, you establish some goals, some purpose to what they're doing. But I think what is lovely about the process with the athlete is over time you establish more about their purpose. It's obviously an ever-building relationship, so they're not going to give 100% of them to you on the first day, but that process of time, you can kind of shape the athlete to understanding how to look at a goal.
I think a big thing that I've noticed is a lot of people who chase only numbers, perhaps, usually are the ones who will leave in like 12 months. Right? You'll see them do like 3 competitions and then they'll kind of never come back. And sure, they might hit those numbers. They might even break a record. Like I know in our federation there are Irish records that are held by people for the past 5 years and competed once, set the record at that meet, never came back.
I would like to jump in as well is with people that just have numbers as goals, once they hit that goal, it's like, now what? Like they've done it.
What's the next number?
Yeah, so it's like, what's the next number? Or it's just they're done. Like they've completed what they set out to do. So there's not too much depth to a number.
Lucy, what was the thing you were going to weigh in? I really wanted to know.
My problem with people setting numbers as goals is that you're constantly trying to compare yourself to someone else. Like you're not saying that you want to squat 100 kilograms because you actually want to. You want to squat 100 kilograms because you've seen someone else squat 100 kilograms of your body weight and you think that is like the target to hit. I don't think it's necessarily like unheard of to have, or wrong to have metrics in mind that you want to hit. I have lifetime goals that we've talked about when we were in Vienna. Like what is realistically what is possible for a 63 kg woman? And apparently a 250 deadlift was maybe not an appropriate answer. But I think it is right to have these long-term goals, because every time if you have 100 kilogram squat, for example, once you meet that, you're going to break it, and then because Alice, you're strong, you're going to break that, and then what's next? Like having lifetime goals kind of keeps you going. I think for me, like you kind of put a purpose into every single session, because you know that these are all of the steps that you have to make to get there. But I think when it comes down to making short-term goals, that has to be, you have to resonate with it, but there also has to be, a genuine, valid reason. Like, tell me, why is it that you want to hit 8 hours of sleep every night? Is that really going to make a significant difference if you were already hitting 7 hours? If that's the case, then make a better goal, because that's weak. Like, pick something that means something and is achievable, but will actually give you positive impacts as well. I'm quite strict with like, not necessarily like putting people down on their short-term goals, but making sure that they have quality. Because sleeping 8 hours, what if you sleep for 9? Does that mean that, is that not right? Have you not achieved that goal because you slept over? But yeah, that's my kind of.
I think a big thing with that is it sort of brings us into that second point of focused attention. So whenever we're looking at, say, for example, sleeping 8 hours, like if you want to get your minimum sleep, there are probably certain things that you're going to have to cut out within a certain time frame to make sure that that happens, right? Like, no harm, TikTok till 1 a.m., not conducive to 8 hours of sleep, right? And so removing that as a distraction is going to be one of the biggest things surrounding this next principle of deliberate practice, which is focused attention. Alice, I know I've kind of already asked you this question, but I want it again kind of specifically under this framework of how do you have your athletes get that level of focused attention? And what are some of the most common distractions you find your athletes eliminating?
What, in the middle of their sessions or in day-to-day life?
I'm gonna say give me 2 from each.
Okay, so like middle of sessions, it's scrolling in between sets, which I feel like all of us sometimes could be guilty of doing. And that's when I bring in if you're scrolling between your sets, don't go on social media at all, just time your rest periods. Then what you do in your rest period is up to you. But I do feel like if you're watching a watch or a timer, you probably aren't going to end up scrolling. Another distraction, probably like chatting in the gym, but that's something that as a coach, I don't actually see if they're doing it. But I do sometimes get notes on programs where they'll be like, oh, I talk too much. Or like after my last warm up, I ended up getting caught up with someone and then it might have not moved that well. So my athletes, I would say, would probably own up to it to me, but it's obviously not something that I can track. And then day-to-day life distractions. I don't know whether I've ever been told of any day-to-day life distractions from any of my athletes, other than maybe like working too much. They're like committing to too much overtime. And then they're having to squeeze all their sessions in towards the end of the week. But then again, I can't be like, no, you can't work. You can't do your extra shifts because you just want to earn more money. But then when it gets closer to competitions, that's when I see some changes. I've got an athlete she's coming up to 12 weeks out and she's already told me that she's not going to pick up any more overtime shifts. So we're not having to condense any of her sessions. Because she's 12 weeks out.
I want to open this up to everyone else because I've seen a couple of unmutes from a couple different people, and it just seems, by facial expression, it just seems like this is one that people are passionate about. Adam, I know you
I'll
had
quickly
an
jump in. There was the study of, so Alice was talking about being on your phone in the session scrolling, and the study is, I can't remember the exact figure of it, but the type, when you go on your phone, essentially takes away your focus of what you're actually doing. And to regain that focus, if someone knows the figure, like just jump in now, but it takes X amount of time to get back into what you're doing and to a standard that is conducive what you need to do. So whilst it might seem harmless, like those 30 seconds, it takes it away from what you're actually doing. So that's what I wanted to jump in on.
Lucy, did you have something as well?
I have a life distraction that I'd like to own up to because I feel like this is a safe space to do it. But I live 30 seconds away from the gym now, and if I come back to get changed, sometimes I accidentally fall and have a nap before I go to the gym. And sometimes I think it genuinely makes my session better. Like 20 minutes, I'm like, okay, feeling good, ready to go. I have my pre-workout snack, and then 20 minutes later, I'm like ready. But I'm sure there must be like probably some scientific evidence out there that probably says that that's not a good thing to do. But I wonder if anyone has any opinions on that because I quite like doing it, but I don't think I should.
Cool, you had an opinion before I jumped in. I was very quickly going to say it's 23 to 30 minutes time to regain focus. Which also, like, bearing in mind the type of media you use. So if you're on TikTok and you consume 15 pieces in the time between that break, which typically is what you'll consume within like those few minutes, means that there's all of those things in your mind, and then you're trying to regain focus. Like, how the fuck do I brace again? Anyway, come, sorry.
No, I was just going to add that I have the complete opposite effect of what Lucy has. So I used to nap before my sessions, and I would drag, and they are the worst sessions ever. But I would keep doing it because I used to work out in the evening after a full day's work, and I am just tired, and I always feel like I need a nap, but it always ends up being worse. So I've had the complete opposite reaction.
I was going to raise two more, and one specifically for us coaches is not scrolling things like TikTok, but replying to clients in session, like separating your work or your training and your work in session. So there's a fine balance, is because you have set hours. If we're in prep, we might outline that to our athletes and say, if I'm training, I'm not going to be responding in this time period. But outside of that, if we're just in off season, we can add a degree of lenience. I do this myself, is if I've got an important top set or some like hard working sets, I would just offlay it a little bit until I can come back to it. It would be like 10-15 minutes, but having that differentiation. But another one would be, if we're talking about our athletes, a lot of athletes are in the vicinity of studying at uni. So going out, freshers and all of that stuff, I think that's an easy distraction for them. And whilst it might not impact that session that day, which is earlier, it will impact their subsequent session and it'll have a knock-on effect. And depending how engaged they are in that sort of scenario or going out and how frequent, that's a big impact. But there's loads that we can talk about.
I just wanted to clarify the naps one, because there is a good degree of science on this. It depends on the length of time. So if you're a good napper, effective, anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes, like depending on the time frame between the tasks. So short naps can increase focus, coordination, and mental clarity. They can temporarily offset tiredness if you've had poor sleep. They can improve mood regulation and so on. The con is if it's anywhere from like 20 minutes to 60 minutes, is for up to an hour and a half, it down regulates performance. So if you nap for too long, it's worse for your training. So if you're a good napper, you can still do it. If you're a bad napper, you can't.
There's something on top of that as well, is there's, I think, 3 stages of your sleep. So if you do the first 3 stages, you've had a good nap. But then if you run into that 4th stage, which is the first stage, then your cycle of sleep is interrupted. So then you'll essentially be worse off.
Can I nerd for a second, Brandon, and then you can tell me shut up? Okay, so people say they can't sleep before competitions. You need a number of sleep cycles. Each person needs a different number of sleep cycles. It ranges 3 to 6 typically. It can be lower. And so a lot of Olympic athletes or other athletes have realized that if they maintain the number of sleep cycles in the 24-hour period before competing, they'll be absolutely fine. So if you can get a full cycle, now the cycle is making sure you get to REM sleep and back, then you could actually do like a nap and then your shitty sleep the night before competition and still have adequate sleep that you could do beforehand. So most powerlifters who know they can't sleep before should commit to a 1 hour sleep earlier in the day when they can. Anyway, sorry.
That's actually good. That is sauce for someone who just can't sleep before a comp. There was a point that was mentioned specifically by Adam surrounding the communications and like a coach's boundary within their own training with communicating with their athletes. Within Dedicated by Design, that is something that all of the coaches hold to a really, really high standard, is that level of communication, the quality of the communication, and how informative that is. Callum, you are probably one of the most avid proponents of this, and so I wanted to turn this question to you. With that 3rd stage of deliberate practice, right? So we're talking immediate and informative feedback. How do you balance this with the 2 ends of the spectrum, which is looks good, thumbs up, and entirely overcoaching someone within that immediacy?
I think for a lot of feedback, it's kind of differentiating the value. So like very short, acute feedback should have pretty low total value to like the long-term performance, because you're talking about like acute changes that can have small impact. If it's a very large scale impact, then it needs their focus and yours to be able to give it and receive it. And so like no different from video analysis, right? Someone sends a video and says, how does this look? I'm like, I just want to focus on this one thing. And then I'm like, actually, if you submit it for analysis, let me break it down. Here's the problem. Here's the solution. Here's the thing we're going to focus on. This is what we should be seeing come at the back of it. So it's the depth of the feedback that's needed and the amount of attention. And at the same time, like the degree of value in that moment of what it's going to be. Because I think short feedback loops are very valuable until it's a huge quantity of information. So like we can say like, okay, learning how to deadlift, a pause deadlift gives you a really short feedback loop. But if you've never fucking deadlifted, it is not feedback. And so I think it's just the degree of what that value potentially is and how much they need to learn from it. Does that answer the question? I felt like I did that.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's a really key thing with people. A lot of us as athletes have probably had the experience of like just really, really short kind of nigh on meaningless communications with some coaches. And I think that that's something which, now this might be a little bit controversial, is probably quite unique to the industry of powerlifting in general. Kat will my wife Kat will very frequently describe powerlifting as like a Wild West sport, because there is like no Olympics, it's not recognized by the NCAA. There's so much stuff that it's very Wild West. Like anyone realistically can call themselves a powerlifting coach. And so I kind of want to turn this to like the athletes getting out of their comfort zone. So we've talked about this feedback and the volume, or perhaps not necessarily the volume, but the complications or the tax basically that communication will have with that athlete, depending on where that is and the nuance within that. How then, come back to you, do we get athletes to purposefully practice those challenging variations or get into those challenging conditions while also still maintaining those standards?
That's a tough one. Gonna try to answer the best I can. I think just reminding them where they want to go. So like if it's just, I want to do my first competition, and if they're dealing with something, just reminding them that they want to get to this specific point, and whatever it is that's in front of them is essentially kind of a roadblock. And, you know, you can climb over a roadblock and go around it, take a different route. That's the analogy I typically go to. Just because there's something in the road doesn't mean you can't work around it. Hopefully that answered that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to turn it to Lucy as well. Lucy, within your programming specifically, what are some things that you use to purposefully challenge people in perhaps their most challenging variations, or what are some of the common things that you're finding across your programming that you're like, we're having this problem, so I'm seeing a lot of this in my own programs?
I think like to challenge the athletes more, you could keep pushing them into PR territory, because that is pushing them out of their comfort zone. They are weights that they're not, 100% comfortable with. They're, RP 8s, potentially 9s, but you obviously can't do that regularly. So I use accessories as a way to kind of keep people push people out of their comfort zones. So an RP on a dumbbell press, for example, but varying the reps, so between 8 and 12. So they also have that capacity to push, further and further in accordance to like the group that I've given them. So it's down to them to kind of make the decision as to how many reps that they think they've got. Obviously, they've got an RPE to meet, but it's pushing them harder in those accessories. So we're not massively over fatiguing them when it comes to like your primary lifts. But even when it comes to like a 3x5, if someone's not used to repping work, pushing that to like an RP6, that can be hard work. Although it's, it's a lower RPE, you're still expecting potentially 50 reps out of someone that is used to only doing maybe 12. So I use varied reps and also RPEs majority of the time in their accessories to push them further and further to kind of build that confidence, basically.
There's another side to this coin that I want to open this up to everyone with, and this is immediately relating back to our most recent one where we talked about environments and people's training environment, what they prefer. Your comfort zone may not necessarily just be like the variations that you're used to, or your program or your protocol that you end up getting comfortable with, but it may actually also be your condition, right? So the conditions that you surround yourself with, maybe it's Adam's temperature controlled room, or whatever it may be. Do any of us find value, or have any of us done this, or maybe we just open this discussion up to what would be the value of this, of deliberately perhaps placing a lifter in a condition or an environment that they are otherwise not 100% comfortable with? Perhaps it's still competition equipment, but it pushes them really far out of their comfort zone and into a new environment.
So I'll jump into this one. Obviously, I train alone. I don't like busy environments. I don't like hectic environments, which is everything about powerlifting me. So if I was to go back into a meet or be a national meet, then a measure that I could put in place is literally just going to a public powerlifting gym. That'll put me out of my comfort zone. Like, because I essentially run all my variables. I can do my sets when I want, put the music I want on, because at the moment I don't have music, but I can train at the temperatures, Brandon said, I can train at the humidity, and I can control all of these. But the moment I step out into a busy environment, on top of those variables not being controlled, it can just throw everything out. So that's one thing I could do to step out of my comfort zone to fit what the competition would be.
One thing I like to do with, sorry, Lucy, go ahead.
No, that's okay, you go.
One thing I like to do with my athletes is actually get them to embrace the temperature changes. So a lot of the times when summer rolls around, a lot of people complain about the heat, or when winter rolls around, people complain about the cold. And a lot of the times you can't control that on a platform. You could go to a venue where it's extremely hot or extremely cold. It's a lot of things you can't change. You can't change the temperature. You can't control it. And I try to get a lot of my athletes to embrace that level of like uncomfortableness. Sorry.
Something that isn't necessarily deliberate, but something that I have to manage with my athletes is the time in which they have to train. If you've got people sleeping off night shifts, you've got people working till 3 a.m. and then that's actually their kind of lunchtime, dinner time, and then time to train. That's that's a factor that you can't actually prepare them for. But it's really interesting that some of my athletes have had the best sessions of the week actually at 3 a.m. I don't know how it works. I don't know what is going on. I don't believe that it is a sustainable method of training to prolong. But when you have no choice and that's the night shift that they're on, it's really interesting that they still manage to turn up and put in more effort than they normally would. Maybe it's because the gym's a bit quieter. Maybe, it's got different factors. They've probably eaten at different times. But it's really interesting that sometimes at really early in the hours of the morning, they're still smashing out their sessions.
The addition I was going to say to that, so like each of those circumstances where you can kind of reframe the positive. So someone trains at 3 a.m, you're like, well, you've had all your food, you typically haven't had that. Or someone has to train even earlier, like what that's being, if it's very, very late, if it's very, very early, then it being like it's quiet, you don't have to wait for equipment, of like always the reframe. One of the things I was going to say, I have had to change with a lifter is I had to get Lucy to start listening to music because we went to nationals and she had a migraine because there was sound. And now she has to listen to music, which is the worst thing that's ever happened to me because I have to listen to it in her videos and it's awful. Your music taste is not fantastic. I'm so sorry. Also, just for anyone who's listening to this and not watching it, they all laughed. That was very funny. Thank you.
I actually listen to Callum's music now, so if he has a problem with it, it's his fault.
Fuck.
Callum hasn't realized that it's his own Spotify playlist that's been on. He's like, what is Lucy listening to?
And I'd say there's no worse medium to crack a joke on where you laugh, everyone's giggling, and I'm like, but it's silent. Like now.
The bead of sweat rolls down Callum's forehead as he's like, I know no one can hear everyone laughing.
They're laughing, I promise it's happening.
The final point of deliberate practice comes into reflection and refinement, which Callum, you've actually just briefly touched on, where we talk about the reflection and the reframing of that. Alice, you've talked about your feedback being given in a sandwich, right? Where there's something good, there's the actual, perhaps harsher feedback, and then it's given again. What way have you applied that sandwich technique with that reflection and refinement, perhaps being like post-session? Say, for example, if there are these distractions, what way would you frame someone bringing that focused attention into their session in that sandwich technique?
Well, it's just like highlighting what went well in that session despite distraction. And then the negative bit not being overly negative, obviously just making it constructive. What can we do to change that, or to eliminate, or just reduce that distraction? And then obviously the outcome being the last positive bit of how that's going to improve their sessions.
I think that's huge. That's something that like a lot of people perhaps struggle with. I think a lot of us are different characters. We give our feedback in different ways. We actually prefer to receive our feedback in different ways. And something that's kind of started online is this whole, we've lent really heavy on like the looks good, thumbs up is a real red flag with coaches. We're kind of coming full circle again, where we're seeing some content that's being like, well, actually, if you're over coaching, that's not good either, right? And this is something that I find interesting about the powerlifting space and a lot of spaces in general, is that we kind of have this ebb and flow, which is how it should be. We're never really in a binary system. It's always a spectrum. And that's something that I really like about the way that Alice gives her feedback, is that it is within this sandwich technique. It's so valuable to know that something did look good, but to know what looked good specifically, and for that to be reinforced, that behavior to be reinforced, or for that thing to be reinforced, that actually there is still room for improvement, that you're not a perfect human being, and we can be a little bit better, highlighting what that is and making that constructive, and then going into the outcome of being excited for that athlete, of like, I'm really excited to see what happens whenever we crack this. All of this relates full circle. So we went through all of the 5 principles of deliberate practice. So that was well-defined goals, focused attention, immediate and informative feedback, getting out of your comfort zone, and then reflection and refinement. This literally loops right round again back to those defined goals. So it is a repeatable cycle. The reason that I say that is because when we talk about post-session review, or say, for example, we're talking about the outcome within that sandwich, that reflection, that refinement, that review is going to go back to and support those well-defined goals. I had a really, think of me what you will, but I had a really interesting experience with one of my athletes this week, where in our check-in forms, we talked about what are you going to do to support your short-term goals, right? So our short-term goals being this block, long-term goals being this cycle. And they had written down an answer, and I was in Loom, and I went into their program and I checked, and there wasn't anything in there. And I had asked them to put it in one other time, and I hope they're listening. But I literally came back into the Loom and went, don't talk to me until you have this written down. Of like, get something in there. I really genuinely cannot stress the importance of goal setting. You can't have deliberate practice if you don't have a goal. You don't know what to be attentive with. You don't know what to get feedback on. You don't know how to get out of your comfort zone. And you don't know what to reflect on if you don't have a goal in the first place. And that's something that I just feel so passionately on, that every single one of us could be doing better as athletes, as coaches, but really down to the very, very depths of who we are as human beings, of irrespective of what discipline you're putting this in my opinion, being locked in is having and doing deliberate practice and applying each of these principles. I want to open this up again to everyone and kind of ask the question of, what are some goals that you've perhaps been locked in for, or you've used deliberate practice that you're now perhaps realizing in hindsight that it was actually deliberate practice that you were doing, maybe not every step, but you were, I guess you're highlighting one of those points that you're like, oh yeah, I remember whenever I was chasing this goal, or now perhaps it's a goal that you're chasing, that you're feeling one of these 5 principles the most.
Just for anyone who's listening, everyone is contemplating this. We haven't all just given up.
Everyone just shrugs. They're like, I don't know, man.
While everyone says what theirs are, because we're talking specifically within the realm of powerlifting, right? Like we're going as athletes. I just want to say, like, I have been utterly piss poor across the board and had the worst training off the back of it. I have no specific goals. There's been no feedback on those goals because I have no system. There is know out of my comfort zone. I've done the same training for 13 years. And so like, just to speak on the other end of this. So when you guys go, you know what, mine is this, and I've done this because of the thing, for anyone else who's listening, of being like, hey, I'm the example of do not fucking leave it. Like it's not this is a nice chat. If you've made it this far, maybe you understand the principle. I can promise you, like, being on the other side of it doesn't go well. It's not a good idea. Someone.
I think mine is pushing myself out of my comfort zone, because when I get bored, I get complacent. And if I'm not like constantly pushing myself out my comfort zone, whether it's like going through the whole rehab scenario, whether it's like pushing for a comp standard or trying to find a new way to squat, whatever it is, pushing myself out of my comfort zone, that's what keeps me going, because I'm like, I'm switched on, I'm focused, and it's something different, and I don't get bored and complacent. So, I think I set goals quite well, but sticking to them and making sure I achieve them, keeping myself out of my comfort zone, that's what really helps me.
For me, I think one is I'm incredibly stubborn with my training. So I'm just like, because over the past 4 weeks, I've taken a major step back with my training, but I cannot stop training. So I'll still do it. So I've not exactly had this overwhelming goal over the past 4 weeks, but now I'm kind of like in this process of re-establishing what those goals are, and it's to train to to get back into normal training, and that normal training being different to what I was before, because I'm now 10 kilos lighter all of a sudden, and I've got all of these other factors, and so I'm in that process of what is the goal going forward, because the goal I was associating myself with when I'd say at my strongest, it's kind of had a short-term shift. So I have to go through this process of establishing my why again. And so that way I can move forward in the most practical way, but attentive way to what I actually need to do, rather than just having no goal. And again, as Callum was saying, there's no feedback to give to that goal. So it's kind of like the process that I'm in is re-establishing.
I was going to say mine has been, and Callum has, I can't find the voice note, but I used to listen to it every time I warmed up. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. Where I told him I wasn't planning to have a meet, but he said something along the lines of, like, essentially, that's cool, but that doesn't mean we let go of the standard. It means we still keep pushing the standard. And then next time you get on the platform, we show that standard. And that's been something I've tried to carry on.
I thought you meant a different voice note.
Oh.
Yeah. When you were like, can you get me amped up? And I sent you one calling you a bitch.
That wasn't voice note, that was a text message. But yeah, essentially, keeping my standards up when I'm training, staying intentional, and trying to limit distractions while I'm training.
I'll actually jump in on this because you mentioned distractions, because that's very much my one of like focusing a lot more on focused attention. I had a really, really busy few weeks coaching. I had 6 compete within 2 weeks. Only at 2 different meets. Well, no, actually 3 different meets, 3 different countries, 6 different athletes. A lot of like remote handling and a great deal of in-person handling as well. And that was not that long ago. And obviously I just competed on Sunday, and I find this real strain between like giving everything to coaching, giving everything to being an athlete, and like trying to be 100% in both of those places just does not work for extended periods of time. A coach here in Northern Ireland that I will have to give credit to, Dean Gracie, once said to me that the poison isn't in the dose, but it's in the time frame. Essentially hinting at the fact that you could do really, really hard things for a short period of time and still survive just fine. But if you're doing really, really hard things for a very extended period of time, you will start to see those repercussions. And that was something that I was very much feeling between this like coach-athlete relationship within myself. What I've done, it's blurry, but I have a line in the middle of my whiteboard, and all of my coach stuff goes on the top of it, and all of my athlete stuff, as in for me as an athlete, goes below that. Thank goodness it's blurry so that people can't see what I've written on that. But Coombe literally just went to try and figure out what it was. But that was something that I had to do, of have like a genuine and very stark separation between myself as a coach and myself as an athlete. Not to hint at the fact that those cannot coexist, but the kind of something that Adam has talked about, like the magnitude of your goals will usually determine just how focused you actually have to be in order to make this happen, or the person that you have to become to make those things happen, right? And that's why, as Adam mentioned, in those competitive periods, or if we're getting up to hard working sets or hard top sets, the phone goes down for a couple minutes so that we can be with ourselves as athletes for a moment.
I'm just poking to make sure Alice does hers as well, because I'm really interested to see what you say.
I really can't think. I can think of goals, but I can't. I actually got the list of the 5 principles in front of me, and I can't link a goal to one of them.
Alice just lives in locked in.
Well, I think the reason I wanted Alice to answer, and like I hope you don't mind me saying this, is that your goal actually post comp was the opposite. It was to be significantly less locked in and significantly higher reduction of stress in training. And so like I was thinking of like, when you are goal setting, do all of these things have to be perfect to move the needle still? Or is it that you can go, there are elements of these I will allow to be inconsistent to reduce the stress?
Sorry,
I would
that weird. Can you say that again?
I was just thinking about if allowing some of these elements to be less restrictive. So whether it's well-defined or focused, like your goals are well-defined, but they're less focused right now, and that's intentional.
Yeah, it's all intentional.
I would actually like to add, there is a rule called the 80-20 rule, which is that 80% of your outcome is determined by 20% of your input. I believe I've probably butchered that, but I hope you understand the sentiment. That actually applies to itself. So 4% of your input is responsible for 64%. In other words, 20% of 20 and 80% of 80. 4% of everything that you do gives you 64% of all of your results. That's astonishing. And so a big thing is figuring out what exactly is that 4% so that you can essentially rid up the remainder of that 96%. It's something that I find to be incredibly powerful, of being focused on the things that deserve to be focused on and not focusing on the things that are otherwise just noise. There is a really good quadrant to look into, which it's basically a Punnett square, if you will, which has important, non-important, urgent, and not urgent. Things can be important and urgent, and things can be the total opposite end. So quadrant 4, which would be not important and not urgent. Things like phone calls, really interestingly, are the vast majority of the phone calls that you get seem urgent, so you'd put them in that first one, but a lot of the time aren't important, and so actually fall into quadrant 3. A lot of the best work that you will ever do is by working in quadrant 2, which is non-urgent but important. So you're working on future projects, or you're working on things that urgent and important typically is like the firefighting, but not urgent but important is where some of the most productive work goes into. As athletes, I think it's really, really worthwhile of looking into that, of going, I'll clear my quadrant 1, I'll clear my urgent and important, but to put deliberate practice into that second quadrant, where perhaps these things are not quite urgent, but they are important, is where you just level up beyond probably what you're expecting. There's a great quote that says that people often overestimate what they can do in a month and underestimate what they can do in a year. I think the huge caveat with this when applying it to powerlifting is that if you are only playing in a block, you need to be playing on a longer time frame. Applying all of these principles is something that I have a lot of passion surrounding, because I've come from the other end of the coin of being hyper unfocused and not really paying any attention to my training. And so I hope that you've all found value out of this. Really, really big thank you to every one of the coaches that have attended and for their contributions. And I hope that this has been helpful for each and every one of you. If you're on the YouTube, like, subscribe, and comment your favorite section of the call. We'll see y'all later.